In this video, I'm going to talk about deep squat mechanics, why you need enough hip internal rotation for deep squats, and I'm going to give you 2 exercises to improve your hip internal rotation. So let's get to it. Why do we need hip internal rotation for deep squats? To answer this, we first have to clear up the misconception that hip internal rotation is just the knees caving in, which if that's happening uncontrollably during the descent of a deep squat, we definitely don't want that. So that's definitely not the hip internal rotation that we're talking about. So what is? Okay, to answer that, I want you to think of the motion of bringing your knee to your chest, okay? In a squat, you're bringing your chest to your knees. And you may also notice that at some point in bringing your knee towards your chest, in order for them to get closer to each other, you're gonna need to do one of 2 things. Number 1 is rounding your spine a ton, and number 2 is turning your thigh out a ton. And if you're gonna do that in a squat really early, let's say in a squat where you're bringing your chest to your knees, if your low back rounds really early, then you're probably not gonna be able to get all the way down. And likewise, if at a certain point in your descent, you're forced to get your thighs super far out in order to get any lower, well, this is not going to allow me to get my hamstrings to touch my calves to deep squat. It's just physically impossible for me to squat down all the way with a stance this wide. So that's where hip internal rotation capacity comes in. Okay, the more hip internal rotation that you have access to, the higher that you're going to be able to bring your knee towards your chest without needing to turn out and without needing to round your spine. And the more of this that you have, then the more of this that you have, where you'll be able to bring your chest towards your knees and delay that back rounding and delay that thigh turning out long enough that, okay, this works, right? Because it's not that rounding your low back is bad. It's not that turning your thighs out is bad. It's that if you're forced to rely on those strategies super early on in the descent of your squat, then it's physically impossible to get down all the way, okay? So that's why you need hip internal rotation to be able to deep squat. Now I'm going to give you 2 exercises to improve your hip internal rotation. The first exercise, I'm going to lay on my left side because I'm targeting my right hip, and I'm going to bring my knee a bit towards my chest, just so that there's roughly a 120-degree angle between my torso and my thighs. From there, ideally, I would also have something between my thighs, just so that my right leg is a bit elevated. Then from there, I'm going to try to turn my thigh around my hip socket. And in doing so, this muscle right here, the side glute, it should feel like it's almost gonna cramp. And if it's not yet cramping, then do more reps, or try to turn that thigh more and more and more around that hip socket, but strictly, right? You see, I'm not just side bending my body to lift that leg. I'm actually turning my thigh bone as strictly as I can around my hip socket, and nothing else on my body is moving. Okay, do that. Poke at that side butt muscle. It should be a bit behind your front pocket. Poke it. Make sure you can feel it squeezing, shortening, just like in a bicep curl where you're raising the weight and your bicep is shortening, it's squeezing. It's the same thing as should be happening to that side glute muscle. Okay, so that's the first exercise. The second exercise, you're gonna be seated like so, okay? Again, I'm targeting my right hip, so here my right leg is behind me like so. And I'm gonna make sure that my right knee is bent to 90 degrees. My left leg, I don't care so much about, just make sure it's comfortable. Make sure that right knee is bent to 90 degrees. And then from here, I'm gonna get tall with my spine. Make sure that my tailbone is untucked, right? As opposed to hunched over and tucked, okay? We don't want that. We want this untucked tailbone, long spine. From there, you're gonna try to turn your pelvis toward your back leg. And in doing so, you should feel your high inner thigh stretching, but under tension. It's like with the bicep curl, it's now it's like you're lowering the weight. So there's still tension in your bicep, but now the muscle fibers are lengthening as opposed to shortening. So get tall, untuck that tailbone, and start to turn your pelvis toward that back leg that is bent to 90 degrees, and find that high inner thigh lengthening tension. And once you found that, then that's as far as you go. Just turn back a bit and then do it again. Try to find it again, perhaps more intensely this time. Find that lengthening tension in the high inner thigh. Do that a bunch of times, and yeah, that's the second exercise. So 2 exercises. One is for this side of your hip joint. The other exercise is for this side of the hip joint. And if you get both of them done really well, once you stand up, it should feel like those muscles are being really supportive of your hip joint. And it should then feel like it's easier to move into hip internal rotation. Like everything's just a bit smoother. Okay, so that does it for this video. If you got any comments, questions, leave it in the comments below.